You're under arrest for elder abuse and financial exploitation. The detective's words echoed through my downtown apartment as two officers pulled my arms behind my back. Through the window, I could see my brother Marcus on the sidewalk below, his arm wrapped protectively around our 78-year-old grandmother Rose. She was crying into his shoulder, her frail body shaking. He looked up at my window with an expression I'd seen 1,000 times before. Righteous fury mixed with performative grief. The look that said, "I always knew you were capable of this." I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I just watched as the man who had drained $70,000 from our grandmother's account stood there playing the role of her savior. 24 hours ago, he wasn't her protector. He was on his knees in my living room, begging me to help him hide what he'd done. He thought he could use the family scapegoat one last time. He was wrong. If you stay with me, I'll show you exactly how I dismantled his perfect lie, piece by piece. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I want to know who's part of this journey with me. It began exactly 24 hours before the arrest. I was finishing up the quarterly audit for a small nonprofit when my phone rang. Marcus. My stomach did that familiar clench, the Pavlovian response of someone who had spent 32 years being their sibling's emergency contact, cleanup crew, and emotional punching bag. I stared at his name on the screen, my finger hovering over decline. But that's the thing about being conditioned. The programming runs deeper than logic. I answered, "Sarah." "Oh God, Sarah." His voice cracked with panic I'd heard in every crisis since we were kids. "It's Grandma Rose. She fell. I'm at the hospital with her right now. They're running tests. Possible stroke. She's terrified and confused and she keeps asking for you. I need you to go to her apartment and get her medications, her insurance cards. She'll need them for admission. Please. You're the only one who knows where she keeps everything. I'm drowning here." The request seemed reasonable on the surface. Our grandmother lived alone in a rent-controlled apartment in Brooklyn. I had helped her organize her medical documents last year when her doctor switched her medications. Marcus was the golden child, the successful commercial real estate broker with the corner office and the expensive suits, but he wasn't the detail person. I was always the one who handled the messy logistics of family life while he collected the praise. But there were holes in his story big enough to drive a truck through. Rose had her weekly book club on Tuesday evenings. She never missed it. Why would she be alone in her apartment to fall? And Marcus worked in Manhattan. How did he get to Brooklyn Methodist Hospital so fast? The questions should have been sirens. Instead, they were whispers I pushed down with the familiar thought, "Don't make waves. He needs help. Just do it." I told him I'd go. I always said yes. 40 minutes later, I was standing in my grandmother's apartment, a cozy one-bedroom filled with photographs spanning 8 decades and the smell of her signature lavender sachets. I found her medication organizer, her Medicare card, her living will. As I gathered the documents, my phone buzzed. Not a call this time. A text from my mother, Diane. "We trusted you with her. How could you do this to your own grandmother?" My hands went cold. I read it again. Then again. Before I could respond, another message came through. This time from my father, Robert. "The bank called us. Don't try to deny it. We have proof. You're not our daughter anymore." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Bank? Proof? I was standing in my grandmother's apartment collecting her medical information like Marcus had asked. What were they talking about? I tried calling my mother. Straight to voicemail. I tried my father. Blocked. I tried Marcus. Disconnected. That's when I heard the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside the apartment. Heavy. Multiple people. The doorknob turned. I hadn't locked it behind me because I was only supposed to be there for 5 minutes. The door swung open. 3 police officers stood in the doorway, hands near their weapons. Behind them was a detective in a charcoal suit, his badge clipped to his belt. He looked at me standing there with my grandmother's documents in my hands, and his expression hardened into something between disgust and pity. "Sarah Chen?" I nodded, my voice trapped somewhere in my chest. "You're under arrest for elder abuse, financial exploitation, and fraud. You have the right to remain silent." The next few minutes dissolved into a chaos of Miranda rights and handcuffs and neighbors peering out from behind cracked doors. But the moment that actually shattered me wasn't the physical act of being arrested. It was when they led me past the building's lobby and I saw the crowd gathered on the sidewalk. My grandmother Rose, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her, wrapped in a blanket despite the humid summer evening. My parents standing on either side of her like sentries. And Marcus, front and center, his phone out, recording everything. As they guided me toward the police car, the detective pulled out his own phone and pressed play. A voice filled the humid air. My voice. Distorted slightly but unmistakably mine. "Grandma, I need you to sign these papers. It's for your own good. You trust me, don't you? I'm the only one who cares about you. Mom and Dad don't visit anymore. Marcus doesn't call. But I'm here. So just sign. Don't read it. Trust me, the audio quality was perfect. The intonation, the gentle manipulation, the casual cruelty. It was me. Except it wasn't. I had never said those words. I had never coerced my grandmother into signing anything. But as I looked at the faces of my family, I saw that they believed it. Of course they did. Because in their story, I had always been the problem child. The jealous one. The difficult one. The scapegoat. I looked at the detective, opened my mouth to defend myself, to scream the truth into the thick summer air. But nothing came out. My throat closed. My body went limp. They loaded me into the cruiser, and I sat there in silence while my brother stood on the sidewalk, his arm around our grandmother, playing the hero he'd spent his entire life pretending to be. People think that when you're falsely accused, you fight. You rage. You demand justice with every fiber of your being. But that's not what happens when you've been gaslit for 3 decades. When your family has spent your entire life telling you that your perception is wrong, your feelings are invalid, your reality is a lie, your nervous system learns to shut down instead of fight back. Psychologists call it learned helplessness. I call it the survival mechanism of the designated family failure. When everyone you love points at you and says, "You are the villain," a broken part of your brain accepts it. Not because you're guilty, but because it feels inevitable. Of course I was the villain. In the story of our family, I had always been cast in that role. So as they drove me to the precinct, as my brother's performance played out on the sidewalk behind me, I felt something darker than fear. I felt the terrible comfort of confirmation. The scapegoat always takes the fall. This was just another Tuesday. The interrogation room was a windowless cube painted institutional beige. It smelled like industrial coffee and decades of fierce sweat. Detective Hammond sat across from me, laying out documents like he was dealing cards in a rigged game. Document 1. A power of attorney form with my grandmother's signature and my name as the designated agent. Filed 6 weeks ago. Your grandmother signed this, giving you complete control over her finances, Detective Hammond said, his voice flat with practiced neutrality. 3 days later, $70,000 started disappearing from her savings account. Small transfers at first. 500 here. 1,000 there. Then bigger chunks. 10,000. 15,000. All going to an offshore account we've traced back to shell companies registered under your name. Document 2. Bank statements highlighted in yellow marker, showing the transfers he described. The dates, the amounts, the account numbers. It was methodical. It was devastating. It was completely fabricated. Document 3. A photograph of me taken from a distance, entering a bank branch in Lower Manhattan. Timestamp, 3 weeks ago. Your grandmother's bank, Detective Hammond continued. The teller remembers you. Said you were agitated. Insistent. Wanted to make a large withdrawal from an account that wasn't yours. I stared at the photo. It was me. Same haircut, same jacket I'd worn that day. But I had never been to that bank. I'd been at work 3 weeks ago, in a conference room in Midtown, presenting quarterly financials to a board of directors. I had witnesses. I had calendar invites. I had time-stamped emails. The pieces didn't fit together, but as I looked at Detective Hammond's face, I realized he didn't care about the pieces that didn't fit. He cared about the narrative. We're looking at 10 to 15 years, he said, leaning back in his metal chair. Elder abuse is taken very seriously in this state. Especially when the victim is as vulnerable as your grandmother. The prosecutor is talking about making an example out of you. But here's the thing, Sarah. I don't think you're a monster. I think you got in over your head. Maybe you had debts. Maybe you felt overlooked. Your brother's successful, your parents always favored him. I get it. Family dynamics are complicated. He slid a legal pad across the table, a pen rolling behind it. Help us recover the money, and the DA might consider a reduced sentence. 7 years instead of 15. Maybe less with good behavior. You'd be out before you're 40. Still have a life ahead of you. But if you make us chase it, if you play games, you'll die in prison. So, talk to me, Sarah. Where did the money go? The word die hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. For the first time in 24 hours, the fog of learned helplessness began to crack. This wasn't just Marcus being Marcus. This wasn't just my family needing a scapegoat for some minor embarrassment. This was systematic, calculated destruction. Someone had forged documents. Someone had created shell companies in my name. Someone had staged photographs and coached my grandmother and orchestrated this entire nightmare with the precision of a military operation. I thought about the $70,000. That number wasn't random. 6 months ago, Marcus had mentioned over Sunday dinner at our parents' house that he needed a short-term bridge loan for a real estate deal that had gone sideways. $75,000, he'd said. Just for 60 days until the property sold. He'd asked me first, casually, like it was nothing. I'd said no. I was saving for a down payment on my own apartment. I'd spent a decade living below my means, sacrificing, building my nest egg. I wasn't going to hand it over to my brother for another one of his get-rich-quick schemes. He'd laughed it off. Said he understood. Said he'd figure it out. 2 weeks later, he'd mentioned at another family dinner that he'd found an investor. Everything was handled. But what if he hadn't found an investor? What if the deal fell through? What if he'd needed that money desperately, and the only available source was our grandmother's life savings? I looked at the documents again. The power of attorney was dated 6 weeks ago. The first transfer was 3 days later. The timeline made sense if you changed the protagonist. My brother had access to our grandmother. He visited her every Sunday. He was charming. Persuasive. It wouldn't be hard for him to convince a 78-year-old woman with early-stage memory issues to sign some papers. Just administrative stuff, Grandma. To make things easier for you. And if she questioned it later? If she noticed money missing? Well, you just needed a scapegoat. Someone who already had a lifetime of being blamed for things they didn't do. Someone whose protests would be dismissed as more evidence of their difficult nature. I sat up straighter, the metal chair biting into my spine. I want a lawyer, I said. My voice came out rough but steady. And I want you to verify the authenticity of these documents. Check the signatures, check the IP addresses on those transfers. Because I didn't do this. Detective Hammond's expression didn't change, but I caught something in his eyes. Not doubt, exactly. More like recalculation. He'd expected me to fold. The scapegoat always folded. See, that's what guilty people say, he replied. Innocent people usually start with an explanation. They tell us where they were, what they were doing. They offer alibis. You went straight to lawyers and forensics. That's the defense of someone who knows they need defending. He stood up, gathering the documents into a neat stack. Your family is in the victim waiting room right now. Your grandmother is crying. Your mother can barely speak. Your brother, he paused, savoring the moment, your brother is the one who reported you. Came to the station this morning with these bank statements, these records. Said he'd been suspicious for weeks but didn't want to believe it. Said he feels like he failed his grandmother by not seeing it sooner. That's a man racked with guilt over trusting his sister. As Hammond left the room, I realized the brilliance of Marcus's setup. He hadn't just framed me for the crime. He'd framed himself as the hero who reluctantly exposed it. The golden child, forced into the painful position of turning in his own sister to protect their vulnerable grandmother. In one move, he'd stolen $70,000 and elevated his status in the family even higher. I would go to prison, and he would be praised for his moral courage. But what Detective Hammond didn't know, what Marcus couldn't have anticipated, was that I wasn't alone in this. Not entirely. Because while I'd been sitting in that interrogation room, another drama had been unfolding 2 floors below. My brother's business partner, Derek Chen, no relation despite the shared last name, had been sitting in a different interrogation room. Derek was 41, methodical, and deeply conflict-averse. He'd been Marcus's partner in their commercial real estate firm for 6 years, handling the financial side while Marcus worked his charm on clients and investors. But in the last 6 months, Derek had started noticing discrepancies. Money moving in ways that didn't match the books. Properties being flipped through shell companies. A pattern of financial manipulation that made his accountant's soul deeply uncomfortable. When Marcus had asked Derek to help him set up an offshore account for what he called tax optimization, Derek had reluctantly agreed. It was borderline illegal, but not uncommon in their industry. What Derek didn't know was that Marcus had used Derek's credentials, Derek's digital signature, to set up the shell companies that were now linked to the theft from our grandmother's account. When the police had shown up at their office that morning asking about the offshore accounts, Marcus had done what he always did. He'd thrown someone else under the bus. Told the police that Derek had been acting strange, secretive. That Derek had access to everything and Marcus suspected something was wrong but couldn't prove it. So now Derek was sitting 2 floors below me, being told he was an accessory to elder abuse and fraud. That he could face 7 years in prison unless he cooperated. And Derek, meticulous Derek who kept backups of backups and documented everything, had made a decision. He pulled out his phone. Not to call his lawyer. To show the police his insurance policy. For the past 3 months, as things had gotten increasingly sketchy, Derek had been recording conversations. He had Marcus on tape talking about the bridge loan that fell through. Marcus panicking about the $75,000 he owed to a private lender who was not the forgiving type. Marcus saying, "I'll get it from my grandmother. She won't even notice. She barely knows what day it is anymore." He had Marcus explaining how he'd gotten our grandmother to sign the power of attorney. How he'd used her early-stage dementia to his advantage. And most damning of all, he had Marcus talking about me. About how if anything went wrong, if anyone asked questions, he'd just blame his sister. She's been the family screw-up since birth. They'll believe she did it. They always believe the worst about her. Derek told the police about the voice cloning software Marcus had used, the same technology that creates deepfake audio. Showed them the receipts for the program Marcus had purchased. Explained how Marcus had used old voicemails and family videos to generate the fake recording of me coercing our grandmother. As I sat alone in the interrogation room, the door opened again. But this time, it wasn't Detective Hammond, it was a different detective, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a tablet in her hands. She introduced herself as Detective Rodriguez. She sat down across from me and said 4 words that changed everything. Your brother's partner talked. They moved me from the interrogation room to a witness waiting area. Brought me coffee that actually tasted like coffee instead of burnt despair. Detective Rodriguez explained what they'd learned from Derek. Showed me the recordings, the documentation, the digital trail that proved Marcus had orchestrated everything. The relief was so intense it felt like pain, like blood rushing back into a limb that had fallen asleep. But we need your help, Rodriguez said. To make this case airtight, we need your grandmother. We need her to tell us what really happened. The problem is, right now, she's terrified of you. Your brother has spent the last 24 hours convincing her that you're dangerous. That you manipulated her. She won't talk to us about you without breaking down. I thought about my grandmother, Rose. Sharp as a tack until about 2 years ago when the small forgetfulnesses started. Misplacing keys. Forgetting appointments. Nothing dramatic, just the slow erosion of certainty that comes with age. Marcus had weaponized her vulnerability. Used her confusion as a tool. And now she was sitting in a victim waiting room, believing that her granddaughter, who had spent countless Sundays visiting her, helping her with crossword puzzles, listening to her stories, had betrayed her in the cruelest way possible. The thought filled me with a rage so pure it burned away the last remnants of the scapegoat conditioning. I looked at Detective Rodriguez and said, "Let me talk to her. Let me try." They set it up in a neutral room, not an interrogation space but a family consultation room with soft lighting and comfortable chairs. They brought my grandmother in first. She looked so small, wrapped in that blanket, her silver hair uncombed, her eyes red from crying. When I walked in, she actually flinched. Pulled back like I might hurt her. My mother and father were there too, flanking her like guards. And Marcus. Of course Marcus was there. He sat in the corner, his expression carefully arranged into concern, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. He was doing math. Figuring out if his story would hold. The detective stayed in the room but stepped back. Gave us space. I sat down across from my grandmother, my hands visible on my lap, my posture open, non-threatening. I didn't speak right away. I just looked at her, this woman who had taught me to bake rougelock, who had slipped me $20 bills at family gatherings with a wink, who had told me stories about surviving as an immigrant in New York in the 1950s. I let her see me. Really see me. Not the monster Marcus had painted, but the granddaughter she'd known for 32 years, Grandma Rose. I said softly. "Do you remember the last time I visited you? It was 2 Sundays ago. You showed me your new library book. A mystery novel. You said the detective reminded you of Grandpa Leo. You said you missed him." She blinked, the memory surfacing through the fog of confusion and fear. I saw recognition flicker in her eyes. I continued, voice steady. "Do you remember what we had for lunch? You made your chicken soup. With the matzo balls. You told me the secret was seltzer water in the mix. You made me promise not to tell anyone else." Her hands, which had been clenched in her lap, relaxed slightly. That's when Marcus spoke up, his voice dripping with practiced concern. "She's manipulating you, Grandma. That's what she does. She gets you to trust her, and then she takes advantage. Remember what I told you about the papers she made you sign? But I didn't let him derail it. I kept my eyes on my grandmother. Grandma, have you ever seen me at your bank? Have I ever asked you to sign papers about money? Have I ever told you not to trust your family?" She shook her head slowly. The blanket slipped from her shoulders. My mother reached to adjust it, but my grandmother waved her off. Her eyes were clearing, the confusion giving way to something sharper. "When did I sign papers?" she asked. Her voice was thin but steady. "I don't remember signing papers." Marcus leaned forward. "Grandma, it's okay. You don't have to remember. The important thing is Sarah took advantage of you. The bank has proof." That's when my grandmother did something that surprised everyone. She turned to look at Marcus, really look at him, and said, "You're the one who brought me papers. Last month. You said they were for my health care. You said Sarah was too busy to help anymore. You said I should make you my power of attorney because you had more time to take care of things." The room went silent. Marcus's carefully constructed expression cracked. Just for a second, but enough. My mother looked at him, then at me, then back at him. For the first time in my life, I saw doubt cross her face when she looked at her golden child. Detective Rodriguez chose that moment to speak. She pulled out her tablet, turned it toward my grandmother. "Mrs. Rose. I'm going to play some audio recordings. I need you to listen carefully and tell me if you recognize the voice." She played Derek's recordings. Marcus's voice, clear as day, talking about getting money from our grandmother. About using her confusion. About framing me. With each second of audio, my grandmother's face changed. The fear evaporated. What replaced it was something I'd only seen a few times in my life. My grandmother, the woman who had survived poverty and discrimination and the death of the love of her life, getting angry. When the recording finished, she turned to Marcus, her grandson, the golden child, and she said, in a voice that carried the weight of 8 decades, "You did this. You stole from me, and you tried to blame her." Marcus started to respond, to summon the charm that had carried him through every previous crisis. But this time, the audience wasn't buying it. My father stood up, his face gray. My mother put her hand over her mouth. And my grandmother, frail and confused and supposedly vulnerable, looked at the detectives and said, "I want to press charges. Against him. Not her. Him." The arrest happened quickly after that. Different room, different handcuffs, same script. Marcus protesting his innocence. Marcus playing the victim. But this time, the detectives had evidence. They had Derek's testimony. They had the recordings. They had the digital trail of the shell companies and the voice cloning software. And most damning of all, they had our grandmother, the supposed victim, pointing directly at her golden child grandson and telling the truth. My parents tried to follow Marcus as they led him out, but Detective Hemmond stopped them. Gently but firmly suggested they might want to stay and talk to their other child. The one they'd been ready to condemn without trial. My mother turned to look at me, her face a mess of confusion and shame and the slow, dawning horror of realization. All those years. All those times they'd believed Marcus over me. All those accusations I'd absorbed and apologies I'd made for things I didn't do. I should have felt vindicated. Triumphant. But instead, I felt hollow. Because this wasn't just about money or fraud. This was about 32 years of being cast as the problem. Of being conditioned to accept blame. Of watching my brother get away with everything while I carried the weight of the family's dysfunction. And now, finally, they were seeing the truth. But it didn't erase the damage. My mother started to speak, but I held up my hand. I wasn't ready for apologies. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I turned to my grandmother instead. She looked tired, older than her 78 years, but there was clarity in her eyes that I hadn't seen in months. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have known. I should have trusted you." I knelt beside her chair, took her hand. "It wasn't your fault, Grandma. He manipulated both of us. He manipulated everyone. But it's over now." The legal process took months. Marcus was charged with elder abuse, fraud, identity theft, and a dozen other crimes that Derek's documentation made impossible to deny. His business partner testified at trial, playing the recordings for the jury, showing the evidence of Marcus's systematic fraud. Our grandmother testified too, describing how Marcus had pressured her to sign documents, how he'd told her I was too busy to visit anymore, how he'd slowly isolated her while draining her savings. The defense tried to paint me as the real culprit, claimed I had manipulated Derek and coached our grandmother. But the digital evidence was overwhelming. The metadata on the voice cloning software, the IP addresses of the shell company registrations, all traced back to Marcus's devices, the paper trail of the failed real estate deal and the private lender demanding payment. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Marcus to 12 years in federal prison. No early release. No country club facility. Real prison, with real consequences. My parents sat in the gallery, watching their golden child be led away in handcuffs. They tried to reconcile with me during the trial. Sent emails, left voicemails, showed up at my apartment. My mother crying, my father awkward and stiff, both of them trying to find words for the years of damage they'd enabled. I'd agreed to meet them once, sat across from them in a coffee shop and listened as they apologized. Said they didn't know. Said Marcus had always been so convincing. Said they'd failed me. I told them the truth. That I needed time. That I wasn't ready to fold them back into my life. That maybe someday I could forgive, but right now, I needed to focus on healing. They didn't take it well. My mother cried. My father got defensive. They wanted absolution without accountability. They wanted me to go back to being the accommodating daughter who absorbed their dysfunction with a smile. But I was done playing that role. I gave them a choice. Real therapy, family therapy with a professional who specialized in scapegoat dynamics and narcissistic family systems. Weekly sessions, homework, actual work on understanding what they'd done and why. Or nothing. No relationship at all. They're still thinking about it. I'm not holding my breath. My grandmother and I are close again. Closer than before, actually. The ordeal seemed to sharpen something in her. Bring back some of the clarity that had been fading. We have lunch every Sunday, just the two of us. She moved into an assisted living facility. A nice one with her own apartment and a community room where she plays canasta with women who make her laugh. I helped her pick it out. Helped her move. Made sure every document was read, understood, properly filed. The money Marcus stole was recovered. Most of it, anyway. Enough for my grandmother to live comfortably for the rest of her life. She tried to give some of it to me, said it was the least she could do. I refused. What I needed from her wasn't money. It was the truth. The validation. The knowledge that I wasn't crazy, wasn't difficult, wasn't the problem child they'd made me believe I was. I used the settlement from the civil suit we filed against Marcus to start something I'd been thinking about for years. A nonprofit that provides legal advocacy for family scapegoats. People who've been financially abused by relatives. Who've been gaslit and blamed and conditioned to accept dysfunction as normal. We help them navigate the legal system. We connect them with therapists who understand family trauma. We give them resources to break free. It's small right now. Just me and 2 part-time staff working out of a shared office space in Brooklyn. But we're growing. The need is bigger than I ever imagined. Every week, I get emails from people who've lived through variations of my story. The brother who stole the inheritance. The sister who forged the will. The parent who drained the college fund. All of them the same pattern. The golden child taking, the scapegoat blamed, the family closing ranks around the lie. My grandmother came to the ribbon cutting when we opened the office. She wore her best dress and her pearls and made a speech about the importance of truth. About how families are supposed to protect each other, not devour each other. About how she was proud of me for taking pain and turning it into purpose. When she finished, she pulled me aside and whispered, "Your grandfather would have loved this. He always knew you were special." I think about that sometimes. About the grandfather I barely remember, who died when I was 7. I wonder if he saw it too. The family dynamics. The golden child being molded, the scapegoat being shaped. I wonder if he tried to stop it, or if he was part of it, or if it was too subtle to see until it had calcified into something immovable. But I'm moving it now. One case at a time. One person at a time. Teaching people that the story their family tells about them doesn't have to be the truth. That being blamed doesn't make you guilty. That surviving dysfunction doesn't make you broken. Last month, I got a letter from Marcus. From prison. It was 8 pages long, handwritten, full of apologies and justifications, and the same manipulation dressed up in the language of rehabilitation. He said he'd found God. He said he understood now what he'd done. He said he hoped someday I could forgive him because family is everything. I read it once. Then I filed it away in a folder I keep for evidence, because I know Marcus. I know that in his mind, this is just another role to play. The repentant sinner. The reformed criminal. He'll serve his time, get released, and try to slide back into the golden child position with a redemption story that makes him the hero of his own journey. But I'm not part of his story anymore. I've written my own. This is a story about a woman who spent 32 years being told she was the problem, who almost went to prison for a crime she didn't commit, and who used that nightmare to build something that matters. Not revenge. Not bitterness. But purpose. If this resonates with you, if you've ever been the scapegoat in your family's story, I want you to know something. You're not alone. You're not crazy. You're not the problem. The system that needed you to be the villain is the problem. And you have the power to walk away from it. To write a different ending. To build something beautiful out of the wreckage. That's what justice really looks like. Not just seeing the villain punished, though that matters. But seeing the survivor thrive. Every person we help at the Advocacy Center. Every family scapegoat who learns to set boundaries and demand accountability. Every person who breaks the cycle. That's the real victory. That's how we win.